Hello and welcome back. I'm Nicole, a cottage witch, and this is finally the last episode, or whatever you want to call these things, in this Read Around the World Challenge series recap thing. It's been fun, for me anyway. Hopefully it's not been too boring for you, and if it has, there are a lot of other really fantastic videos out there. So anyway, here we go. Okay, I'm discovering on this map that the lines in the gold don't entirely match up always with the lines underneath, because I've uncovered part of Yemen here. But so for Saudi Arabia, I read The Book Smuggler, which was a good book, but not like ultra memorable, because I remember liking it, but not much else about it. And then A History of Saudi Arabia is one that I really want to read this year, because it's the only, I think it's the only history book of the Middle East by an author from the Middle East. Those are really hard to find in English. And then Senegal. Where is Senegal here? Oh, there it is. Oh, that's going to be hard to scratch off without also scratching off Gambia. But The Abandoned Baobab Tree is it's a really interesting book. It's another one of those where if you don't have the culture knowledge, it might be a bit difficult to connect to. And there were definitely times like that in the book where I just didn't, you just sort of have to go with it. But it was an interesting look at one woman's, like, she grew up in a Catholic school in Senegal, being taught certain things about the West. And then she actually went to the West, I think Scotland, and found that her experience of it was not as advertised, let's say. Mostly because of racism and sexism. But yeah, that's, oh dear, Gambia. You're so little. It's skinny. Okay. That's that. But yeah, it was good. It was hard to connect to for me, but it was a good one. Glad I read it. And then Serbia. I DNF'd The Tiger's Wife. Do I scratch that off? Probably best not. Sierra Leone, Ishmael Bay's A Long Way Gone. I do want to read, I think I have The Memory of Love by Aminata Forna. Haven't read it yet though, but Ishmael Bay's A Long Way Gone was a really heartbreaking. Where's Sierra Leone here? There it is. Story about a child soldier in the Civil War, and it's so, like, it was a good book, but it's hard to read about kids living through any sort of kids in war situation is going to be ugly, and this book, no exception. All right, Serbia, Sierra Leone, Somalia, map. Okay, so I've read several books by Somalian authors. Maps is really good. Nuruddin Farah is one of these sort of classic Arabic authors. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, A Caged Virgin. I liked reading that book. It was interesting to get her point of view. She's been through a lot in her life. The trouble is, okay, so this happens, I've noticed, when people leave fundamentalist Christianity. They become so far opposite of that, like the pendulum swings so far that they become fundamentalist about something else, new age stuff or atheism or whatever. Like, it's difficult. And so I feel like the same thing has sort of happened with this author. She'd been through so much with fundamentalist Islam that she's really become anti-Islam of all sorts, and her thinking patterns really, I don't know if they didn't really have a chance to develop when she was a kid or just became really rigid because of fundamentalism, but she's not flexible in the way that she thinks or views the world, and she can't really conceive of a version of Islam that works for anybody, even though people say every day that it works for them. So yeah, she's become a bit, I think, alt-right and just rigid in her thinking in other ways. South Africa. Okay, so Mandela's book, A Long Walk to Freedom, was one that I had to read. And it's a long book. I mean, a lot happened over several decades, but it's a good one. Like, if you really want to understand anything about South Africa, it's a good way to start. Another book that I'll get to by an Eswatini author. So maybe I'll just scratch that off now instead of trying to go around it. Because I think it's under Swaziland here coming up, but they prefer to be called Eswatini now. What was I trying to say? Oh, it's set in apartheid South Africa, so it's a detective and his illegal family under apartheid. Ooh, the other book that I've read is Trevor Noah's memoir, which I picked up in a free little library today because I thought my dad might like it, because he does like a lot of these memoirs by like people from all over the world in different political situations and whatnot. But anyway, this book from Essotina was really interesting because, like, Mandela's book was phenomenal, but it doesn't really give you an insight into what everyday life was like for ordinary people, you know? And this novel really did that, and it really just brings home how inhumane apartheid is, and how incredibly difficult it makes life. Like, life is hard enough as it is. Do we really need to go around making it extra difficult for certain people? Do we? I'd like to think not. Apparently some people in Israel disagree. So next, yeah, South Korea, Han Kun, the Vegetarian. That was a weird book. I don't know. I don't understand it, but I read it. It made its rounds around Bookstagram for a while. I think Han Kun has other books out since then that are also known for just being a bit weird. So if you like weird books, give it a go. South Sudan. Oh, Emmanuel Jall's War Child. So, oh good, South Sudan is on here. That's another book like Ishmael Bey's that's about the experience of being a child soldier in war, and it's equally brutal. Like he's talked since about what happened to his sisters because they were separated really young. You know, as will happen in war when people become refugees. Their villages were burnt. His sisters were sold as like sex slaves, I think. And it really, I mean, obviously that does incalculable damage to people, psychologically, emotionally. And then he was a kid who was a refugee for a while, and then he became a child soldier. And he talks about his indoctrination, which was fascinating, because they really do. They drug kids with a cocktail of all sorts of really not healthy drugs and gunpowder for some reason, to make them, I guess, more pliable. And then indoctrinate them and teach them to hate. So for a long time he thought that all Muslims, because that's where they were fighting in the north, were evil. He's since come to realize that that's obviously not the case, and that oil that's found right about here was a big part of the reason for this war. Sudan has actually drilled at an angle into South Sudan to get some of that oil. But also how religion can be used to like manipulate people in conflict. So it's a really interesting book. He lives in Toronto now, I think, and it is like a hip-hop rapper sort of musician. I've listened to a few of his songs. They're really kind of cool. And he talks about really interesting things, like his experiences in them, which are wild. Spain, The Shadow of the Wind. Ooh, I liked that one. Yeah, that was a good one. Can't think of anything intelligent to say on the subject at the moment. Okay, took a little break to finish Italy too, because I realized I hadn't actually scratched that off. So now I'm on to Sri Lanka. Oh, I liked this book. So Naomi Munawira, I think she's written other books I should look into. If only I had time for all the books. But Island of a Thousand Mirrors was beautiful. It was a really good, a boring thing to say about a book, but it was a really moving book. I loved it. The Sudan. Layla Abu Layla is the translator. This was another one of those books where I like didn't connect with it, and I don't know. I mean, that could be that cultural knowledge thing again, but also I'm just not sure if she's the author for me, you know. So I'll find one of these days. I'll find other authors from Sudan. I'd like to find some history. Like, I do have a book about Darfur by the same guy who wrote, Gerald Predier, who wrote that book about Africa's world war in the Congo. And he seems to know a lot about the region. So I will read that one. I've been meaning to read that for years and just time, you know. But I would like to find something by some nonfiction by a Sudanese author as well. That would be cool. At least a few years ago, it was hard to find in English in Canada. Oh, this one I should check off too, because I have read Present Darkness by Malia Noonan. Is one of the... Is that the book I was thinking of? With the South African detective? It might have been a different one. Anyway, have read that. And I've read all the Stieg Larsson books for Sweden. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, those books. I did... Here's the border with Finland here. Something like that. I love that series so much. Some of the newer books by a couple of other authors, David Lagerkrantz, and there's another one by a woman. They're okay. Like, they're fun. There's just something about the two main characters, Blomkvist and why am I blanking on the main character's name now? The girl with the dragon tattoo. Her. There's something about her in the original books that's captivating. She's such a fascinating character. And I've actually listened to the French translation of the audiobooks, which is pretty cool. And they're still a bit of above my level. But they were really good, and I will either read them or listen to them again in French because I just love that original trilogy. It's so good. But I'm a, Scandinavian or Nordic crime fiction sort of person. That's my thing. ID I put for Switzerland. I feel like I should read something else, but hey, it's a classic. I read it as a kid, so I guess that counts. So there we go, Switzerland. Syria, right. Stripped to the Bone is a book of essays, I guess, short stories, poetry. It's a bunch of different things by Ghada Al-Atrash. It's really, I don't know, it does sort of get into your bones a little bit. And then Tima Curdy's book, The Boy on the Beach, it's the sort of book that'll make you cry. Like, it's just... I don't know if you remember the image or if people outside of Canada, well, I think people outside of Canada must have seen it, because it was that little boy who washed up on a beach in Europe, who dead, and that's her nephew. And so she wrote a book about her family and how that little boy came to be a dead body on a beach, which should never have happened, and it's so heartbreaking. And I think a lot of her family lives in Canada now, because we had her at a literary festival here. And, yeah, just absolutely heartbreaking. Taiwan, The Library of Legends. That was a fun one, as I recalled, but it was quite a few years ago that I've read that now. And then, no, I haven't read Tanzania yet. Tibet, well, that's already uncovered because it was China, but Running with the Mind of Meditation. If you have any interest in running or meditation, it's really good. I've read it twice now. There are some problems. The author has been accused of sexual assault or something. So, if you want to avoid authors like that, maybe don't, but it's still a really good book. Thailand. So I've read Pepper Teagan's Pepper Thai Cookbook, which was really good. So I counted that as my nonfiction book from Thailand because, food is important. How do the borders of Thailand go here? There we go. And then, Togo I haven't read yet. That's on my list soon to do. Turkey. I'll take a break and scratch off Turkey in a second because it's a little bit bigger too. But Elif Shafak is really good. I've read several of her books now. She's excellent. And Orhan Pamuk is a good novelist as well. I don't think he's quite as good as Elif Shafak. He's more renowned internationally. But also, there's some sexism in his books that I'm just not so interested in. But his book on Istanbul is phenomenal. If you have any interest in Turkey or Istanbul, it's excellent. Don't miss it. Okay. I also scratched off Turkmenistan because The Tale of IEP, I'm not sure how to say that, is a good one. It's a really little book. It's like a novella. and it reads like a modern folktale. So if you like folktale type stories, it's a good one. Ukraine. I read Suite Française. I'm so bad at the French R's. You'd think after the number of years I've been studying French, I'd be better at it. Am I better at it? No, I'm really not. Okay, next up is the United Arab Emirates. So Sharon Bala wrote a book called The Boat People, and I don't know if she was born there and lives in Canada now, or if she was born in Canadian to Emirati parents. That book I didn't love. It wasn't my favorite. It felt emotionally manipulative. Like you knew by partway through the book what you were supposed to feel. And that didn't work for me. The Good Wife, Samara Zafar. That's a good book. It's a memoir by a woman who was sort of forced into a marriage that was abusive, and she ended up separating from him in Canada and going back to school, I think, and getting a job and all that sort of thing that she previously hadn't been allowed to do. So where's the UAE? There it is. So that was a good one. The United Kingdom. I've read so many British books. Just so many. Should I leave? I think I'll leave Northern Ireland on there, and the Faroe Islands I think I'll leave as well, because I feel like at some point, whoops, nicked Belgium, that I should probably read books from those places specifically. Specifically Northern Ireland, because I've read some Irish books and I've read some English books, but I really haven't read any Northern Irish books, and I've read some Scottish books, so sort of the area that's missing. The US I'm skipping for now because I'm going to look and see if I want to do it by state or not. Uruguay. This was a good book that I just finished like a week ago, really recently, Cantares. And it's, it's good. It's got some good queer representation, and it's an interesting story. I liked it. I didn't know a lot about Uruguayan politics, but you don't have to know going in. Like, this is one of those books that sort of eases you into it. You don't have to know beforehand. I think it's written mostly for an American audience, but yeah, it was interesting. It was good. It wasn't like phenomenal or anything, but it was good. I liked it. Uzbekistan. Where is Uzbekistan here? The Railway. Hamid Ismailov. So Uzbekistan is one of those interesting countries that's like squashed between the Middle East and Russia. So during the Soviet Union, identity in Uzbekistan got a bit weird. I don't know, conflicted. There was some conflict. Because of course, when some of these countries were part of the Soviet Union, they were Soviets, and they had to be, you had to speak Russian, and you had to, or at least officially you had to speak Russian. But Uzbeks have had their own identity as well. So yeah, it was interesting. It's a novel that I read, and it was one of those ones that's like good, but it was good. I didn't love it, but I'm glad I read it, It was good to read something by an Uzbek author and just like crack open my view of the world a little bit wider, which is basically what that book did. And then, last page. Vietnam. So Kim Thuy is from Vietnam. She was a refugee. Her whole family was, and I think Thi Bui was as well. This is a graphic novel that's based on the memoir of her family. But Kim Thuy she lives in Canada now. She writes in French. I actually have Rue in French as well. But she's written several books, and they're all beautiful. She's such a good writer. And where's Vietnam here? Her translator is really good too, like her French to English translator. But her last book that came out, I read in French first. French only, because I didn't want to wait till it was out in English. And, did I miss things? Yeah, but also, she writes in a very simple way, like a moving way, but a simple way. It's a bit sparse, her language, but it's beautiful, and I loved it. Also, she's done, everything. She's a lawyer, she owns a restaurant. She's an incredibly accomplished woman. Then Yemen. Prison Time in Sana'a. That was a wild book. The political situation in Yemen is so complicated, it's baffling. Like, anytime you hear it presented on the news, just know that it's like a million times more complicated than whatever it is that they're saying. There are so many different groups, so many different identities, merging and conflicting identities, people who have multiple identities, that it's complicated and messy. But what I really liked about this book was that he told the stories about just his conversations in prison with all sorts of people. Just a whole variety of people that the government thought were dangerous. And some of them were Al-Qaeda members, and so legit dangerous. And some of them were just people who criticized the government, but were otherwise perfectly ordinary civilians. So there's a huge range of people in prison in Yemen. And yeah, it was fascinating. The political situation, totally lost on me. But the stories were really good. And then I'm reading this one right now, The Old Drift. Actually, that's what I was listening to as I was scratching off Russia. And it's bizarre, but really interesting. And then Tsitsi Dangarembga was quite possibly the first African author I'd ever read. I found her book, Nervous Conditions, in a secondhand bookshop when I was going to university in Saskatchewan, and it's so good. The sequel is less good. I mean, it's, interesting, but it doesn't hold a candle to the original. But it's, again, about women trying to navigate a post-colonial society and having sometimes considerable difficulty doing that. Because I think she grew up going to a, English state sort of, is it state or Catholic school? I can't remember. Church school. But it was something like that, where you're indoctrinated into the colonial ideal. So yeah, that's the state of my world map at the moment. Aside from Canada and the US, which I'll get to. I do want to read Blindness. I have that book from Brazil, which hopefully I'll get to sometime this year. And then Zambia I'll scratch off really soon, I think. And Algeria I'm going to read this year, and Qatar. So there are a few more countries I want to scratch off this year. We'll see. Oops. And yeah, so that's the state of my world. Oops, world, not traveling, but reading map. Clearly I have some work to do in Central and South America and Africa and Polynesia. Polynesia, Oceania, I'm not really sure what to call that area of islands that I am just astonishingly unfamiliar with. So, like, literally some of them I forget until the Olympics rolls around and they've got a participant and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a country. Cool. So yeah, I've got some work to do in that department, but it's coming along in the rest of the world, and I'm pretty excited about it. So I'm gonna go put this on my wall. If you've actually made it to the end of this, congratulations. It's a bit rambly, I know, but it was fun to sort of recap the countries I've read so far, and hopefully I'll add some more soon this year. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.